Welcome to Performance That Matters. I'm your host, Jordan Sullivan, and today I'm in the studio with my fellow TFD performance dietitian, Jack Doherty. Jack and I are going on a deep dive about picking the best weight class for your body and going over the system we use to determine what is safe and what is not safe when assessing if a weight class is appropriate for a fighter. We also cover the final fight week weight cut and reveal the biggest changes we've made to our fight week protocols based on the latest science and what we have seen work with our UFC fighters in the real world. This episode is all about learning how to create a weight cut system for your body that is tailored to peak performance. Let's get to it. All right, welcome back to another episode of Performance That Matters. I'm joined by Jack Doherty, aka the Combat Dietitian, Big Jack. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
We're talking today about how to cut weight safely for a fight. We're not just going to do MMA. This is going to be applicable for boxers, BJJ guys, Muay Thai, judo, any combat sports really where you have to manipulate your weight and then make weight before competition. What I first want to cover is what do we actually deem as a safe weight cut? And I think that's a conversation not many people have. So when I finish with a client and they've done their competition and we're reflecting, we're going back and going, okay, how was that weight cut? How did you feel during competition or fight week? The big things I'm looking for is, did we lose your weight not so aggressively? Were you able to get through your fight camp and get all your sessions done? Did we avoid injury? Were you able to sleep well at night? I often like them to go to their partner and say, how was that? Give me an honest answer. And if they come back and go, you were the worst person to be around, you were such a grouch, that to me says we were way too aggressive. Libido, sex drive is a huge one. Now, don't get me wrong, that's going to come down when you're training hard, when you're dieting, but it shouldn't completely disappear. That's a really important sign that you've got this right. When we get to the fight week, we don't want to be doing things so drastic that they're describing, oh, that was the toughest week of my life. It was really draining. You want them to say, yeah, okay, like it probably wasn't the funnest. I'm not going to go do it next week, but the food was great. I was sleeping well. I was waking up every day. The weight was coming off. I was still able to go do my media obligations, or if you're a more amateur level fighter, I was still able to go to work. I was still able to socialize. All of those things are really important when we're deeming what's a safe weight cut. And that's an important conversation because fighters are almost fixed to this idea that weight cutting should suck. Weight cutting should be really hard. We need to turn that position away from weight cutting has to be terrible to how can I make this the least sucky ever? How can I make this experience so much better for me? And not only is that going to help your physical performance, your mental performance as well.
100%. One element to this is we got to start before the actual fight camp. And what I mean by that is, how do we set someone up that, if they're a competing athlete, to make sure that they're out of camp or they're off season, whatever you want to call it, is still reflective of what they need to be doing in terms of body composition, performance, nutrition, habits, routines, and those kind of things. When we speak about all this stuff, yes, we'll speak about the specifics of how to execute that correctly and to get the most out of it, but also we got to look at that before and after to set yourself up to be in the best position to start these fight weeks, which I think a lot of the time goes unspoken about. Like, how many times do you have an athlete who, does a camp very well, they weigh in, they fight, fantastic, and then boom, they've disappeared. 8 weeks out from the next fight, they reappear. Hey, can we talk? And I think that is something that potentially can make the difference between a fantastic camp and an average one.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed over the last decade or so doing this with athletes at every single level. The ones that do the best are the ones that have a measured, structured approach, not just for the fight camp, but year round. It's not just, okay, I've got this 8 weeks, I'm going to go so aggressive here and then disappear for 4 weeks and put on loads of weight and then come back and just turn this fight camp into a fat camp. Everything is structured. It's okay, I know I've got my fight camp here. I'm doing a 2 to 4 week pre-camp. And then they give themselves permission. Hey, I've got this time off. I'll enjoy some food. But at the end of the day, I'm an athlete. I'm a 24/7 athlete. This is my job. What I want to do with this episode is let's go through top to toe. Let's just say we've got a new client come through the door. That's the first conversation we're going to have with them. If you're serious about this, you want to get us on board, you need to have this 24/7 mindset. Yep. We're not going to be doing this just fight camp to fight camp. We need you looking after your body as if you're a 365-day athlete.
What I tend to do these days before we go into this specific component is speak about that I like to work with people long term now and break the year into phases. Like you said, pre-camp, there might be a building phase, there might be the fight camp, etc. They all have specific goals. I think a lot of people fall off from their nutrition because they don't have a goal. A fight camp is a very specific goal which you have to work towards. Outside of that, people lose structure and motivation because they don't have a clear goal. So we go through phases. that are aligned with both training and nutrition. So we keep that person on board, and that generally keeps their body composition and then fight ready. To speak about what we do specifically when we onboard a new person, obviously we speak about how much they weigh now and what their desired weight class is, or what weight class they're currently at, or what weight class they want to be at. And I think a lot of the time in our career, we've had people wanting a specific weight class or being told they should be at a weight class because of their height or their frame. For me personally, I prefer a DEXA scan. I feel like that is something that is obviously very accurate, but something that is repeatable over time. I think other scans like InBody are good for a point in time, but not specific enough to be repeatable. And sometimes, as we know, can be very heavily influenced by hydration status. But first and foremost, I look at someone's body composition and analyze their body fat percentage, their lean mass, defining someone's most suited weight class, using those data to kind of drive that discussion. I'll let you speak about it in a bit more detail. But the second part of this, which I think a lot of people do not kind of factor in, is to look at blood work. Because you can help someone choose a weight class, you can help them descend weight, you can help them weight cut, but you need to know what's happening from a kind of a deeper understanding of their physiology through their blood work. For example, I always make sure if my athlete is competing quite regularly and they're cutting weight, that their kidney health is optimal, that their liver health is there. There's no level of potential health risks that we could exacerbate through these practices.
Yeah, the body composition's a big one for me. I appreciate DEXAs aren't perfect, but they're probably the closest we've got to perfect right now. And when I have my clients, I say, yes, do your DEXA, but make sure you do it consistently. Go to the same place, same machine. Make sure you're eating the same thing the night before. You're not doing a sauna right before you go down to get your weight down. Just make sure you're consistent. If you don't have access to a DEXA, go to an InBody and do the same protocol, just so you can get the consistency. And if you don't have access to any of that, skin folds are fine. I personally don't love skin folds because when I look at a DEXA scan, I'm trying to determine your best weight class and I'm trying to determine how healthy you are right now. And a big component to that is I want to know your bone mineral density. I want to see what your bone mineral density is doing over time. I want to know what the long-term impact is. And that bone mineral density, I know, is such an important health factor as you get older. And as these guys move through their career, I want to be able to track that. That's why I really like getting a DEXA. The other part of a DEXA scan that most people don't talk about, and this is something that Dr. Reid Real has spoken about in his earlier work, you can make good estimates of muscle glycogen based on that. And that's really important for two reasons. When we look at these fighters, we're trying to figure out ideal weight class. Part of that equation is going, how much can we cut during that fight week? Cutting carbohydrates is usually the first thing most people consider when cutting weight. We need to get a good estimate from that. And I've found over the years, if you use the methods that Reid outlines in these earlier papers to estimate how much muscle glycogen an athlete has, you will almost always land in the middle of this estimated range, almost always. Very, very powerful tool to use, but something that no one else talks about. Hey, Jack, if I'm fueling you this much during fight camp and getting you to eat this many carbs, that's because I know that you're likely going to be X% glycogen loaded. So for these big sessions, I know I can load you up. When you're going into your big sparring day, I want you to be 70% topped up, 80% topped up, 90% topped up. That's something I think a lot of people miss when it comes to DEXA scans. And yes, from there, you can do a lot of assessment. And the UFC PR has put out some really good data now that we know, okay, what's normal for a featherweight male fighter? What's normal for a heavyweight fighter? We can look at that and compare the ratio of lean mass to body fat, and we can get some normative data. We can do maths on that and go, okay, from this body fat percentage, we can go down and get to this weight. And I appreciate it's not a perfect science. You can make it really perfect for you if you do everything right. It's the start of this system to personalize your nutrition and personalize this weight cutting approach.
Now, speak more about understanding the body's limits from your perspective.
If you come in and you're extremely lean, you can't take something away from nothing. So if you come to us and say, I want to do this huge weight cut and you're already 10, 11% body fat, I go, well, what's the point? We're just going to be cutting into muscle mass. That's functional. Is this really what we're about? We're about performance nutrition. That to me is not performance nutrition. You need to have a runway. Most of our top-level UFC fighters are walking around anywhere between 14 to 16% body fat. If you look at that, if you Google that right now and you look at a chart with pictures of people at 14 to 16% body fat, you go, oh, that's not what they look like at weigh-ins. That's not what they look like when they get into the cage and fight. Yeah, that's very intentional. And most sports and most athletes will do this where they have a period where they're at this what we call optimal energy availability, and that's where their body's working the best. And then we can go into these phases where we drop their calories and we start dropping their body fat. But to do that, you need a runway. If I'm asking you, Jack, to drop 1% body fat every single week leading into your fight week, you can't do that from 10% and end up at 3%. It's not functional. It's not going to happen for an athlete. You need to be up between that 14 to 16%. Most of our guys are coming into fight week around 10 to 12% body fat. And the reason we do that is because we can preserve not only their performance, but to an extent their health in this short, acute 8-week period. But you need to have that runway.
That leads to another question we get a lot that I want to get your perspective on, is that what do you think is a optimal or acceptable body fat percentage for someone to be walking around at?
Two parts to it. I think you've got to understand genetically where you're at, and that's really important because some guys are just going to walk around leaner. That's just absolute fact, and a lot of guys aren't going to like hearing that. Some guys are just going to walk around with abs year round, and I'm sorry, I don't know what else to tell you. Genetics are a real thing. But then there's the other part of this where we can work backwards from your ideal. So if, Jack, you come in and go, I want to fight at 185 pounds, I can then go, okay, if you want to fight at 185 pounds, and let's say we're just cutting, 20 pounds that fight week, okay, 205, and you can work backwards from there. You can also do that with your body fat percentage, okay? We know right now where you're at. Let's say you're 18% body fat. If we want to go pretty mild with this and say lose 0.5% body fat over an 8-week camp, that's 4% total. So we're going down from 18 to 14%. Okay, Jack, this is what your fight week weight is. And then I know that we can drop not body fat that week, but the water. Whether that number is good for you is going to depend on those two factors. What's your genetics? And then what do the numbers actually come out when we assess this? You get this DEXA to start putting this system together, subjective measures. Am I feeling motivated to get to training? Am I rocking up and just sitting in my car going, oh God, I can't even fathom doing this afternoon session? And then objective measures. How am I actually going when I'm cracking pads with coach? Is he telling me I'm performing well? Like, am I sharp? Am I able to slip these punches and move? Get in the gym. Your S&C coach. Are you improving each week when you're doing your testing? If you get all of that right, then that's a good indication. Okay, my body's handling this coming down. Unfortunately, a lot of the times we see athletes not get that right, but they're so fixated on this number, fixated on this weight class, it's not working for them.
Yep. And to add to that, I think with our stance on kind of blood work and the importance of blood work for our athletes, you can also reflect on that data as well. So I know for a fact that some people, I was speaking to one of my guys who fights in the PFL, and he said to me that he feels, and it's also reflected in his blood work, that he feels the best at around 15% body fat. He said he used to walk around 12% because he liked the visible abs, and he said he looked perceptually more like an athlete, which kind of helped his ego in a way. But at 15%, he said he felt, a lot stronger, a lot less fragile in training. And then also we looked at his blood work and his testosterone levels were actually high. So you've got to look at those kind of data as well. And that's why I kind of wanted to ask you that question, because not only is these body compositions, these testing to kind of assess baseline and where we think you should be, but also what you're saying in terms of breaking it down into that camp. How many weeks do we have? Where's your body fat at? Where do we need to be at start of fight week? And you can do two things. You can give you a general advice about weight classes, and then you can do specific planning. And throughout that, if you're getting blood work, semi-regularly, you can understand what different approaches are doing to your blood work. And that can obviously steer the way your kind of objective feedback is to some data-driven science as well. So I think that's a very important part to understand. It's not just picking a weight class, jumping a deficit and going towards fight week. It's about breaking it down and seeing how realistic it is, because we've worked with, I'll give you an anecdote about this, is that, I've worked with someone recently and they were very low body fat and they were determined to go to this specific weight class. We gave ourselves a very extended period of time to get there. I said, listen, you're going to have to basically change your body composition and lose a bit of muscle mass. This is going to require a protein deficit, a very large caloric deficit. You're not going to feel that great. And we went over that time. I think it was about after he did do what everything he's supposed to do and make weight, but he said it was, absolutely miserable. His performance was terrible. No libido, no energy, all those kind of things. And then since then, we've changed weight classes. We've gone up about 4 kilos, and he is absolutely chalk and cheese different and performing completely different. And that's what I advised initially, and just shows you that when now we reflect on the situation, the change of approach, and I showed him the data and the why behind my reasoning, and he was like, this is completely. I'm so on board with what you're saying. This is a big one that we see in the fight world is lower isn't better. And you can be a much better athlete at a larger weight class, depending. You don't have to follow the kind of objective. I need to be, 6% body fat and shredded to the bone to be the best I can be.
Yeah, the blood work is an important one too. Just completing that system, I believe. And I find it interesting. A lot of people, especially some other health professionals, get funny about taking blood work. And I completely understand the burden to the healthcare system. I do get that. But when we're talking about elite level athletes and elite level sporting professionals, their body is their work. It's their tool. That's how they do their job. And you need to look after it. And I truly do believe you can spot a lot of things in the blood work and do some pretty preventative measures by consistently tracking that blood work, especially when you're in a sport like we are, where you're constantly dipping into these acute relative energy deficiency stages. You need to have some type of system to track that. Yes, you can track bone mineral density over a long period of time, subjective, objective data. Adding in that blood work is really important. That's why we get all our guys to do a complete blood count, thyroid studies, iron studies, get a full testosterone panel, check things like vitamin D3 levels. We want to have some type of objective measure where, okay, Jack, your iron's dipping here. Let's have a look at your diet. Maybe you just missed your red meat for a couple of weeks. Okay, you haven't missed that. Okay, what's actually going on here? Is this something we need to investigate a bit more? Because overall, yeah, we can still make the weight and you can be pretty depleted and all these things can go wrong, but it's performance nutrition. We're trying to get the best outcome for you. And to do that, we need to have the best idea of what's going on in your body. And that's where the blood work comes in.
Now, on to setting up limits. So what I mean by this, talking about what you believe a good weekly weight loss target is, and then we'll move on to like fight week manipulation limits.
Yeah, so let's say you get your DEXA scan, you've got all your numbers. The next part is to put yourself in a deficit and figure out, okay, how am I actually manipulating this tissue? I think first and foremost, it's important to recognize for the majority of people, when you're losing weight in a deficit, you're going to lose both body fat and muscle mass. Now, these numbers will change depending on your diet, your training status, training history, your genetics. You can expect if you're losing, say, 1 kilo of weight, 70% of that usually is body fat, 30% can be muscle. Very, very difficult to avoid that. But again, those numbers, that can be as small as 10% to, as little as 5% muscle that you're losing depending on the person. And it can be as big as 50%, even higher if you completely stuff up the diet and the aggressiveness that you go into that deficit. But it is important to recognize you're not just going to drop body fat when you manipulate these tissues. The reason I say that is because one of the tactics that you can do to try to avoid that is to not go too aggressive with this weight loss. When we say don't go aggressive, the guidelines we use are 0.5% to 1% of your body weight. And if you can do that, we're pretty confident you're not going to stuff up that ratio of fat loss to muscle mass loss. When we see people go 1.5%, 2% per week, which sometimes you have to do, that's when we start seeing that. And I don't think it's favorable. Then you see some guys are in a position when you do that composition scan and you go, man, like to get here, we're losing 2.5% per week. I don't think this is worth it. I just don't think the state of which your body's going to be in by the time you get there, you're just going to be a depleted fighter. Like take some time off, reassess. Let's put yourself in the best position when you get in the cage. It's not going to be this. So if we're giving guidelines, I'd say absolute ideal 0.5% to 1%. Pushing it in my books is 1 to 1.5, and I really don't, even 1.5 to 2, I start getting a bit, I don't want to do that. Anything above 2, I don't really want to touch.
That's great. I think that's a very good target for people to kind of listen into because, as you said, I think a lot of people do it too aggressively and can really stuff this up and kind of put themselves in a negative position early on in fight camp. So if you can have these structured targets, you're less likely to do anything that's kind of too extreme and therefore potentially dangerous to your body. The second part to this I want to talk about, obviously, is the fight week manipulation limit. So the whole week, I think universally it's known that we all used to think that 10% was a good thing to aim for, 10% of your body weight in the week. But we always discuss this, how this has obviously changed dramatically since we started to now in terms of our own outlook on this and kind of the perception of the whole kind of combat sport industry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you got to think about what you're losing in that fight week in conjunction with what we're losing in the fight camp. So if we're saying to you 0.5 to 1% of your body weight leading up, you still got to be in a deficit and you're depleting going up to this point. And then if you're asking your body to do this huge, it's a lot. It's a lot for your body to go through. Again, why we say don't go so aggressive in this loss here. Like you said, we flip-flopped on this, and my flip-flopping started when we go, okay, you can look at the research and go, okay, well, in theory, we can get 10% all the way up to 12% body weight loss in that fight week. But is that ideal? And when you start working with a lot of high level athletes, at least for me, I start looking at that going, probably not. The less that we do is probably the better. What the guidelines would say is your fighter can do 10% in that final week. Be mindful though that when we say 10% body weight loss, you're not losing fat in that period. You should be eating at maintenance calories. You're losing water. So up until that point, you're still dehydrating. So you're still putting stress on that system. Where I like to see our guys coming into fight week nowadays, 8% is probably a bit better. 7 to 8%, even 6 to 8%. I like seeing that. I much rather see our guys, yes, cut weight, but do some really good heat acclimation protocols and then be able to rely on that final sweat, and that final sweat not be such a big percentage of a total body weight loss. I don't personally think at the highest levels of the UFC, the weight advantage is as big as what everyone makes it out to be. And don't get me wrong, whenever I say this, people jump up and down. I completely appreciate, Jack, you're 10, 15 kilos heavier than me. If you punch me in the face, I feel that. I absolutely feel it. If someone's 5 kilos heavier than me, punch you in the face. If you're grappling with someone who's heavy, I completely get that. The thing is, at the UFC, everyone's cutting weight. Everyone's cutting weight. Everyone's putting it back on. It's like we do all these steps to go back to the same point. It's a completely different story if one person's not cutting weight and the other person's cutting weight and there's a huge size discrepancy. But we don't see that in the UFC. There's not these big, huge size discrepancy. And there's good data now. I've got UFC data from, Charles Stuhl, one of our great friends here. And, he's put out weight cutting data. And I love reading this out loud because I think it brings this point home with how much of an advantage is it to cut a lot of weight compared to not cutting much weight. And the winners of UFC fights generally arrive on the Tuesday of fight week. So remember, that's Tuesday of fight week. Then they've got Wednesday, Thursday, weigh-in in Friday. So just be mindful of that. The winners are arriving to fight week at 7.9% over their contracted weight, while the losers are arriving only at 8%. Then when you go, okay, let's look at this even further, and you go, well, what about that last final bit? How much are they cutting? The winners are cutting in the sauna or the bath or running in the sweats 5.4% of their body weight, while the losers are cutting 5.5% of their body weight. And you go, okay, well, not much difference there. Very, very negligible difference. And you go, okay, what about what came back on? That's going to give us a better idea of how much these guys cut overall. Surely there's got to be a difference here. Winners regain, on average, 10.9% of their body weight, while losers regain 10.6%. Again, very small difference. And then you can look at that data and you go, what does that tell you? And that tells me two things, is that everyone in the UFC is cutting weight and that there's not that big of a difference between doing these big weight cuts and small weight cuts. The size advantage is probably exaggerated at that level of the sport. And that's why I think it's important to put these parameters around. And then I go, okay, well, that's what makes me think and make me believe, not only just in theory, but in the practice and work we've done with these elite level UFC fighters, go less aggressive in the fight camp, stick to that 0.5 to 1%. And then when you get to fight week, aim for the 8% cut at best. You're going to be in a better position because there really is no advantage to doing the extra weight cutting. There doesn't seem to be that advantage. If anything, I would argue probably goes the other way. So why put yourself in that position? If it's our job to get our clients the best performance when they walk in the octagon, I'm going with that. I'm not cutting as much weight.
Yeah, I think for the last few years, I've been really pushing that 6 to 8%, and I had a lot of resistance over recently I don't get any resistance because I think people are coming to the party now. But I've been saying this for a long time now, the 6 to 8%. I have resistance from fighters and coaches because of that exact reason. Oh, we're not cutting as much. We're not going to super compensate as much. We're not going to have as much of an advantage. And then of recent, a lot of people come to the party being like, these weight cuts, these large weight cuts are actually hurting. If it's 1 or 2%, they're doing the 10%, it's hurting. My digestion's off. I'm not able to refuel and rehydrate. And then I'm feeling slightly, compromised going into the cage or the ring. Now with these, as people becoming more on board with smaller weight cuts, you're seeing better refueling, better rehydration, better performances. The culture is changing in such a great way, and it's taken years. Remember when we first started, we would get so much. People were like, they can cut 12%. It's only like 5 kilos on a day, and all these kind of throwaway comments. And then the culture has shifted, and people are realizing that it's not just about making the weight. It's doing so to basically prime yourself to rehydrate and refuel in the most optimal way. And that basically comes down to not like stressing the body to a degree where you're compromising its ability to function. And the second part of that is I feel these top level guys also are controlling their body composition outside of camp. I think years ago you would see the classic get in great shape, binge, fat camp. And a lot of people nowadays are coming to the party about, again, that 365 nutrition, looking at it as a way of controlling your body composition, optimizing you're an athlete, not an ability to binge and starve.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a massive shift, but a shift for the better. I think it's a lot better when you see these athletes and you take them through that process. And I think Volk's last fight camp was a great example of that. Volk is traditionally a big weight cutter, and he gets through it. He's the toughest guy I've ever met. He's obviously one of the greatest to ever do it. He'll be a Hall of Famer, former pound for pound, one of the best ever to walk the earth. And that last fight camp, we sat down and went, and let's reduce this. Let's do what we can outside so we're not cutting as much, so we don't have to go through this, and let's see what happens. And to do that, it took a lot of work, took a lot of discipline, a lot of hard work to do it. But we ended up losing 1.6 kilos thereabouts of extra tissue from his body. Not all of it body fat. Majority of that was body fat, about 80% of it or so. So a little bit of muscle loss. But that made that final weight cut so much easier. But it also made him so much better during the camp. Made him so much better because we put this really good pre-camp period in where he could get in a position where he could start fight camp lighter. We come back down, he can still train. All his numbers were fantastic. It made that final weight cut a lot more efficient. You were there, you watch it. Volk does a big weight cut. He goes through it and it's tough, but we got it done much faster than what we normally did, which means we were able to rehydrate quicker. We were able to refuel him faster. And I feel it made a big difference to his performance. Even though a lot of people look at that and go, 1.6 kilos, it makes a big difference.
100%. And to add to that, one thing that we spoke about earlier, and I actually had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with one of my UFC guys about this, is that over time and as you go through your career and you do more and more weight manipulation, weight cuts, it does fundamentally get harder, whether that's physiological or psychological. It does get more difficult. With this particular athlete, we used to come into the fight with the same weight, manipulate the same amount. And he's said that he doesn't want to keep doing it that way because it's fundamentally, whether that's psychological or physiological, it's getting harder for him. So we have now planned for his next upcoming fight to come in around 500 grams to a kilo lighter. And with that decision, I've watched him through camp and he is this is going back to align with kind of the way Volk did it, is that he's in shape quicker. He's still performing really well, but he's just taking it that much more serious. So I think even that little bit more dialed in, he knows that the suffering's going to be less, which is kind of more, there's kind of a motivation, but he's also doing things a lot more dialed in camp. So I think the flow and effect of just taking it that much more serious and not relying on that can make a big difference in the way that the final outcome is in terms of an efficient way in and priming yourself to refuel and rehydrate to be able to fight at your best.
I think that's the next evolution in fight nutrition. We've spent 10 years and I think it's a lot of good work's happened to get to this point of where weight cutting's been made way more efficient, way safer. The next point I think of this is really dialing in and understanding, okay, what's your true ideal weight? What is your true optimal weight to get the best performance out of you within this weight class system? And that's going to probably look like, okay, manipulating down here, not cutting as much, still using a weight cut here, but not being as aggressive, and then rehydrating back to this weight that you know is your highest performance weight. And I definitely see that. But let's get to the fight week. We just said 10%. We're going to go, what strategies are we using? Let's talk it through. We've gone over it before. Talk us through what strategies are we using to get that initial, 5, a little bit more % off before we start this final sweat.
Again, so we obviously usually, we'll give a specific example. Usually we enter, say, fight week, we start manipulating things on the Sunday for a Friday weigh-in. Generally, at this highest level, we'll just speak about that because obviously that's the most, applicable to what we're talking about. But glycogen manipulation, carbohydrate manipulation, we're obviously manipulating fiber as well, sodium, and then basically manipulating your macronutrients so we're able to maintain the level of energy and capacity to function through basically, as we spoke about, reducing the amount of carbohydrate and glycogen for that effect, and then increasing our levels of fats and our protein to kind of make up for that energy discrepancy. But those are the fundamental components alongside water loading. I know these days we don't rely on it as much as maybe we would have. We know that there's responders and non-responders, so again, an individual basis. But that is the principles we start to execute as of Sunday. And then what I do with all my guys these days, and obviously we do that in person on these fight weeks, is every day we check their weight, we see how they're performing, we see what's happening on a few different data points, and then we do those manipulations. Some days on some UFC fight weeks, remember we added in like 500 grams of rice for someone because their weight was coming down too quick. So having that approach where you have these principles and then we have the unique ability to kind of manipulate that intake on a day-to-day basis leading up to that. And that's all got to do with obviously the athlete's comfortability, their kind of feedback, but also how their weight descent is going, and then always thinking about that final 24 hours of how we're going to get from X to Y in the most efficient possible way.
My stance on this has changed over the years. I used to be these are the numbers, and now, like you said, a lot more athlete specific. But if we're talking about a glycogen reduction, you can go anywhere from 50 to 200 grams. I think if you've got the data where you know how much muscle glycogen an athlete can store and you've worked with them throughout the camp and you know what their habitual intake is as it periodizes across the week, or if you're just using a flat line approach, take a percentage down from that, you're going to see a drop. That is something I think is really important. You don't have to use a flat 50 grams of carbs. I've pushed it with athletes all the way up to 250 grams, but because they're habitually eating 500 grams, still a decent drop for them. So making that really specific, you do have to drop carbohydrates for that to happen, but make it relative to what their habitual intake is. I think that's also important for fiber. If you've got an athlete that's habitually eating 25, 30 to 35 grams of fiber a day, which they should be having all throughout camp, then for sure, you're going to get a big drop if you go to 10 grams. I've changed my stance a lot on over the years is sodium. I think people get really aggressive with their sodium restriction. I think if you're combining a water load, you probably don't have to get that aggressive. I think it's more on the erring on the side of caution. I say 500 to 1,000 milligrams, and I tend to push up to 1,000, if not 1,500 milligrams, especially if the athlete throughout camp are good at replacing electrolytes, adding salt to their meals, and they've got, a decent intake throughout their training camp. I would say, so for sodium, 1,000 milligrams minimum every single day. And then when we go to the water load piece, water loading, like you said, comes in and out. I really believe that, again, if you're habitually drinking just 3 liters a day and then you ask someone to drink 9 liters, not only is that taxing on their system, they don't have the habits in place to do it properly. And water loading gets really dangerous when you do it at an incorrect rate because your kidneys can only function and process so much fluid per hour. And water loading gets dangerous. You get blood electrolyte imbalances when you exceed those limits. And the limit, we think, is about 1 liter of fluid per hour of day. And if you're asking someone who's only awake for, 14 to 15 hours, they've got to train, do all that and say, hey, smack back 9, 10 liters, most people are going to try to compress that in a shorter period. That's when it gets really dangerous. You do not want to do that. I tell all my guys, hey, maximum we're probably going to be doing is anywhere between 4, 6, maybe 7 liters if they're a bigger guy, but you're spacing that out. You're having 500 mils an hour, maximum a liter an hour. I do not want you doing more than that. Space that out and still keep that sodium in. Don't go crazy on the salt, but make sure there's some in there. And that's how you can negate a lot of those problems and still get the benefit of water loading if you're one of those people who respond to it.
Another component to that I was speaking about was a lot of athletes complain about needing to pee through when they're water loading, and that's disrupting their sleep, and they're worried. This particular athlete was talking to me about that when he came to me recently. He's like, I don't like fight week for the simple fact of, in terms of the water loading, for the simple fact it's breaking my sleep up so much that I'm feeling exhausted all the time, not just because of manipulation, because of this disrupted sleep. And again, speaking about that, the answer was, well, how much are you drinking? And he was a bantamweight, and he was drinking somewhere of 9 to 10 liters. And I said, who was advising that? And he said someone he'd worked with, but I said maybe we'll change the approach and again do a lesser amount, just slightly above what he's usually doing to induce the effect, and breaking it up a bit more evenly and timing it better. And then obviously the outcome was a lot better. So thinking about things a bit more specifically to what that person's feedback is very important too. And those little changes like that can make the biggest difference. And he saw bigger drops because his sleep was better throughout that week.
And the last little part of this is the weight cut when you're actually in the sauna, bath, you're running in sweats, whatever you're doing. Like we said, 5%, I like to see 3 to 4% max on this for most of my guys nowadays. 5% you can do, but it's a lot. That last 1% will be tough coming out if you're doing 5%. I think this is a raging debate that always happens. If you're doing 5%, I always advocate split that up. The reason I say split that up is because I genuinely believe our body is a lot better being dehydrated than it is being overheated. So if you're going to have to give someone a heat exposure for an amount of time to get 5% off in one session, that's more harmful than giving them that split up over two. And what that means is that, say you give half of that heat exposure the Thursday night before, take half of the weight off, but then you give them time to let their body cool down. You can have a little bit of fluid, you can have something to eat, they can go have a good rest, they can sleep, and their body, the fluids in their body can level out, for lack of a better term. And then when they go back in the morning, then you can expose them to heat once more, and then you can get the last bit off. Yes, dehydration is dangerous, but really the scary, dangerous stuff happens when you're overheated, and you don't want a dehydrated, overheated athlete. And if you're doing those big cuts like that, you're probably going to be in that zone. I'd never say do more than 2 or 3% at a time. If you're in a position where you have to do that, if you're at 4%, split it up. Do some the night before, do some in the morning. Yes, you'll be thirsty, but you'll be okay. You'll get through that. You can have ice cubes, you can have some frozen fruit, wash your mouth out with menthol. It's going to help give you some temporary relief from that. But overall, in terms of your body being safe, you're going to be a lot better off by splitting it up rather than doing a big whack at once.
Yep. And to add to that is something I speak about a lot these days, because we've obviously done so many in-person weight cuts and supervise them, is the psychological tolerance. So I have particular guys who prefer to do certain ways, and that is therefore the most efficient way to keep the stress levels down, and that to be the best outcome for them. I have guys who want to do it all in the morning, and then we have to kind of to tailor our approach to their preference. For example, one of my athletes, he was told by his coach to do it all in the day. Don't do it the night before, do it all in the day. His numbers weren't bad at all, but that's what he decided to do through what his coach said. And then we did it that way, and his tolerance to that heat for that extended amount of time to get that weight off was very limited, and he started to stress, he started to overheat to a degree, and then the sweat rate dropped, and that process elongated to a certain point. The next camp, he said, I don't want to do that again. Can we do a different approach of breaking it up? And we did so, and it was a lot more efficient. He didn't feel stressed, and everything went very smoothly. So understanding the psychological element to it and how to kind of mitigate that by listening to your athlete and kind of balancing the two worlds, what we just spoke about, of the psychological element to the scientific element of the dangers of overheating and dehydration. So I think that's a huge thing that a lot of people don't touch on in this field, is listening to what that athlete's kind of desires and wants are, obviously within reason, but making sure you're factoring in that, because factoring them in this process makes them feel a lot more heard, and therefore makes them feel a lot more in control of the situation. And generally when an athlete feels more in control or more a part of the decision making, the process becomes a little bit more easy to kind of execute, in my personal opinion.
Last one, we won't get into the rehydration and we won't get into the reload because we'll save that for another episode. But just to finish this off, what's your preferred way when it comes to actually getting that final sweat off? Because there's a big debate. Do I do sauna? Do I do bath? Do I exercise? I flip-flopped on this. I used to be very anti certain ways and pro other ways, and I've kind of come full circle and said, you know what, I actually think this is a better way. What's your preferred ways when it comes between bath, sauna, or exercise?
Again, very individualized. All my athletes now heat acclimate. So I like to, first of all, get them to acclimate in what they prefer to do the final cut in. So obviously make it as specific and as aligned as possible. So that some of my athletes prefer bath. Generally, as a general rule, what I prefer to do is the night prior, exercise induced, and maybe the use of a sauna as well in conjunction with each other. And in the morning, very much so the bath and the towels. That's what I've found when I supervise people. That is the most effective and the least stressful way of executing the weight cut. A lot of people are different, but that's personally what I think is the most efficient combination.
Yeah, what I've found, and I guess the psychological side is huge, and you need to consider that with the athlete, because if they're stressed and they don't want to do it, then yeah, good luck, pal. But what I find, like you said, starting with the exercise I really like, and the reason I like the exercise from a physiological sense is the amount of output you have to do to overheat the body during exercise in that state is pretty substantial, that you're likely not going to get there. So you're unlikely going to get an athlete who's hitting pads in, say, just a sauna suit or riding a bike, just in a warm room, you're very unlikely going to get them to a point where they're exerting so much where they're getting dangerously overheated. You'll get them to a point where they start sweating for sure, but it's unlikely they're going to even have the energy to be able to push themselves that hard. And if you've got sensible people in the room, they're not going to make them bash pads as hard as they can, do interval sprints on the bike. They're going to go pretty easy. They're just going to be working up a sweat. So I don't mind that approach. That is better the night before, I believe, because when you do it in the morning, they just don't have the energy. And it's probably a good strategy to do in the morning if they had the energy. But the other part is that once you break this up and you do go, okay, I want to get 2.5% off the night before I'm going to go to bed, say you don't float and you wake up in the morning and you've got to get that other 2.5, the way that it works in your body, the way that what we call osmotic gradients, which is what's pulling sweat out of your body onto your skin, it becomes harder to get that water out. And so you have to heat the body up, and getting the body hot and raising that core body temperature to a point where it will start sweating and getting it out becomes more difficult. That's why you see fighters when they get in the bath or in the sauna in the morning, it's a bit more difficult. And that's why if you're very smart and you can manage this and you can have, say, a bath where you can get the temperature right, you can get the ambient temperature right, you can induce that sweat in a more efficient fashion. And the catch-22 is what we're seeing with, say, these more heat-acclimated athletes. Sometimes you might have to get a portable sauna, which I think is far more effective than the big sauna where everything's hot, your head's hot, your balls are hot, everything else is hot. But with a portable sauna, you can manage the outside air temperature, your head can stay cool, your arms can stay out, but you can give them that little bit extra heat that can bring on the sweat. And then you can, say, move to a bath or move to the towels where you can control the environment a bit more. But I flip-flopped on that because I used to be very anti-exercise, and now I think, you know what, that's probably got its place. You just have to look at it at the individual athlete and go, okay, what's the overall amount that we're cutting here? What's the goal? What's the timings look like? Are we doing it all in one whack? Are we breaking this up? It's got to be very individualized. And I guess the last piece that we keep alluding to is the psychological. What are they like? What are they comfortable with? Have they heat acclimated? Have they practiced this? Have they done this before? How are we making this the best experience as possible for them? So I think that's a pretty good ep. Let's wrap that up. We'll do another episode where we really deep dive into the rehydration and the reload, because I think that is something that a lot of people are still struggling with, and we're still understanding more and more about it. I think I definitely am continually learning more about that rehydration phase and continually learning more about how to best reload our athletes and how to separate that on, straight after weigh-ins and then fight day and what strategies we use. So we'll really deep dive into that. But Big Jack, any final remarks? If this is an athlete that's listening to this going, I want to cut weight, any final pieces of advice that you would give them?
Get your body composition scan, get your blood work done, and speak to someone who has a detailed knowledge of this. Follow a structure year-round to keep your body composition in check, and take fight weeks as serious as possible, and make sure you're doing it as efficiently as possible within the parameters we spoke about.
And any advice I would give is just start developing the system of you. I think use all of that, use what you do have to start developing a really dialed in system for you, because it's not going to be the same as your teammate. It's not going to be the same as your mate over here or what your coach used to do when they used to cut weight. Start putting all of these principles together to develop the system of you, and you will refine that as you do this more. You will get better at it. First things first, to keep it safe, develop that system of you. But let's leave that there. Another great episode. Thanks for coming on, Big Jack.
Yeah.
All right, that is it for another episode of Performance That Matters. If you enjoy this content and want to show us some support, then please leave us a 5-star review and share this episode with a friend. And if you want to go on an even deeper dive on the science of performance and be surrounded by a like-minded community, then come join our high performance group. Head to our Instagram, which is _fightdietitian, and click on the link in our bio. You'll find our circle group where we post daily discussions with our community of athletes, coaches, and nutrition professionals. That's it for now. I'll see you guys for the next episode of Performance That Matters.